My name is Claire Morgan. I am 30 years old. After finishing a brutal night shift as a nurse in Austin, I dragged myself to their house expecting the usual family dinner, Mom whining about her loneliness, Dad asking about my patients. But this time, the scene was eerily different. Candles lit the table, a crisp white tablecloth lay perfectly pressed, and a thick stack of papers waited in the middle. Dad didn't even greet me. "Sit down," he ordered. "It's time to sign for your mistake." I read the title on the first page in bold type, Custody Agreement. Responsible person, Claire Elizabeth Morgan. The document required me to withdraw all my retirement savings, $403,000, and pay $1,900 per month for Liam's care. Everything was ready to be filed in court. Before I continue, tell me in the comments what country you're watching from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if your family has ever pulled something shocking on you. Dad called it fairness, as if the word could make a threat sound noble. "You earn a decent living. It's your duty to take care of your brother." He didn't blink when he said it. Mom didn't raise her voice. She just added, soft and poisonous, "This is payback for your mistake. You remember, if you had walked Liam to the bus, the accident wouldn't have happened." Those sentences have lived in my head for 12 years, like a pair of nails hammered into the same spot. They're the first thing I hear when my alarm goes off at 5:20 a.m., the last thing I think about when I wash my face after a night shift, catching my tired reflection in the mirror above the tiny sink in my apartment. Even when the hospital's fluorescent lights fade from my eyes and I'm home with a microwave dinner, the words are there, waiting to be reheated alongside the food. I was 18 when the mistake happened. That's how it's labeled in our family. Not a day, not a circumstance, just a brand burned into my skin. It was May, humid even in the morning. Our block smelled like cut grass and exhaust, the way Austin does when school's almost out and everyone's restless. I was crouched by the alley with a paper plate of kibble and a chipped bowl of water, calling to the neighborhood strays, the skinny orange Tom we called Cheeto, the calico with the torn ear, the tuxedo who never let me near. I had promised Mom I'd walk Liam to the bus stop because he'd been dragging his feet, and finals made him moody. He was 14, half boy, half blade, sharp with impatience. "Claire, you coming?" he called from the porch, backpack slung low on one shoulder. I remember telling him 2 minutes, without looking up, shaking more food onto the plate because Cheeto had appeared, his ribs like a washboard. Another minute, then another. I heard the front door open and close. The screen door slapped its frame. The sound made me flinch. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and jogged to the front, expecting to see Liam waiting at the bottom of the steps. He wasn't there. I figured he'd started down the block on his own. He did that sometimes, trying to prove he wasn't a kid who needed escorting. That's the frame my parents always choose. The careless sister with cat food under her nails. The responsible son, dutifully heading to the bus stop. Fade a car with bad brakes and worse timing. He got impatient, went on his own, and was hit, Dad recites, as if reading an entry from the family Bible. At least, that's what your parents told you. I'd tell myself in the dark, trying to be kind to the version of me who didn't know better. But I didn't have the luxury of doubt back then. Back then, the narrative was airtight. The hospital called Mom first. I remember the sound she made, not a scream, not a sob, a sucked-in breath that never seemed to come out. We drove without words. The emergency department smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, the waiting room TV on a news loop about a water main break. A nurse with glitter on her badge told us to sit tight. Dad didn't, he paced. I curled forward on the plastic chair and counted my breaths, trying to keep from being torn apart by the thought that my 2 minutes with the cats had been the curse that changed my brother's life. Liam survived, but the words spinal cord injury pinned the day to the calendar forever. There were surgeries, rehab, equipment brochures with smiling models that looked nothing like my brother. There were clipboards and signatures and social workers with damp voices. And then there was home, where every surface felt rearranged around my fault. The ramp out front. The shower chair. The way Dad's mouth tightened when I laughed at something on TV. The way Mom's hand lingered on my shoulder, not with comfort but with pressure, as if to remind me, you carry this now. I deferred my acceptance to UT because Mom said she couldn't manage the schedules without me. Just 1 year, she promised, but one became two as easily as dusk becomes night. I picked up shifts at the grocery store, then the diner on Riverside, and later, after I started nursing school, I stacked clinical hours on top of classes because keeping busy dulled the ache. Every decision was stamped with a ghost stamp only I could see, owes Liam. When I bought my first used car, a dented Toyota that wheezed up hills, Dad said, "Good, now you can drive your brother to therapy." When I took a weekend to study for exams instead of helping repaint the living room, Mom sighed, "Must be nice to put yourself first." Birthdays, holidays, moments that should have been mine were converted into payments. My 21st, a cake on a paper plate at the rehab hospital cafeteria. My pinning ceremony for nursing, they showed up late and Dad whispered that the parking fee was outrageous. When I interviewed for my first job, I practiced answers about patient care and teamwork, but the soundtrack in my head was the family refrain, "It's your fault. You ruined his life, now it's your duty to pay." But I got this job anyway. Money was a ledger I never balanced. If I saved $500, Mom would mention a bill that came in unexpected. If I tucked away $2,000, Dad would bring up a new wheelchair cushion or a van repair. I told myself this was love with a price tag, and I was lucky to be able to pay any of it. When friends invited me to weekend trips, I'd say I was on call even when I wasn't, because I couldn't stand the thought of joy while the debt remained unpaid. I stopped feeding the alley cats after one of Dad's remarks, "Done adopting strays yet?" And the paper plate became a symbol I couldn't look at without tasting shame. Mom's voice cracked like a whip the second I opened my mouth. "If you don't sign, we'll tell your workplace that you're abandoning your brother. Let your colleagues know that you're not the holy nurse you pretend to be." She stood as she said it, palms flat on the tablecloth, the candles throwing jumpy shadows up her face. It wasn't just anger. It was the ugly satisfaction of someone who had finally found the lever that moved me. Dad didn't bother standing. He leaned back and folded his arms, letting the words drop like stones. "The pastor will find out too. People in town think of you as a heroine. Let's see what happens when the truth comes out." The truth. Their word for the story they'd pressed into my ribs for 12 years. I felt the old reflex kick in, that instinct to swallow whatever they served and say thank you. But my mouth was dry. I forced out, "You can't threaten me into signing illegal. Watch us." Mom snapped. "Hospitals care about reputation. One call about neglecting a disabled family member, and you'll be the nurse no one trusts with their child or their parent. You want that?" I pictured the charge nurse's face, the whiteboard with assignments, my name written in dry erase marker next to the sickest patients, because they believed I could handle it. I imagined that belief evaporating, replaced by tight smiles and HR emails. Dad slid a pen across the table as if closing an easy business deal. "Sign it, Claire. Be done with the drama. You make good money. You can afford it. We can't." The walls moved closer, slow and certain. I heard the old clock in the hallway tick in deliberate clicks, like it was counting down to a verdict. Signing meant burying my life for good, no grad school, no saving for a home, no breathing room. Refusing meant losing my reputation, the nods at HB from families who recognized me from night shifts and thanked me for sitting with their father at 3 a.m. while his pain meds kicked in. "I take care of Liam," I said, softer than I wanted. "I always have." "You pay when we ask," Mom corrected, like a teacher with a red pen. "This makes it dependable. Responsible. Adult. Adult." As if adulthood were measured by how thoroughly you could erase yourself. The papers stared up with neat black clauses, the numbers suddenly louder than the words. $403,000 today, $1,900 every month, forever folding into forever. I could feel the weight of my badge lanyard on my neck, the faint indentation it leaves at the end of a shift. Dad's voice dipped lower. "Don't be dramatic. The pastor will understand our position. He knew Liam as a boy. He knows what you did." What I did. The phrase tensed every muscle in my back. "I'm not signing tonight," I said. My hands shook, so I put them in my lap and pressed my wrists together to still them. Mom's chair scraped the floor. "Then tomorrow," she said. "We'll give you until tomorrow to be sensible." Dad gathered the pages like a dealer raking in chips. And if tomorrow you're still playing martyr, we'll make those calls. Workplace. Pastor. Whoever needs to hear. The conversation ended not with a door slam, but with the polite clink of cutlery being gathered. Liam's empty plate stayed where it was, a quiet witness. I stood up too fast and the room tilted. I found my coat on the back of a dining chair and slipped it on, even though the house was warm. I needed the feel of something zipped to my throat, armor against their certainty. Outside, the air had cooled. The porch light hummed, and somewhere down the block a dog barked at nothing. I walked to my car with the pen Dad had slid at me still in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd taken it. It felt like contraband or a hot coal I couldn't drop. In the driver's seat, I locked the doors and let my forehead touch the steering wheel. The dashboard clock glowed 9:42. I thought about calling the charge nurse to ask for an extra shift, as if more work could scrub away the taste of that dining room. I thought about texting Pastor Allen, preempting whatever story my parents planned to tell. I thought about doing nothing, about climbing into bed and letting sleep cancel the problem until morning. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't pressed in years, Sarah Holt. College friend, political science major who argued cleanly and didn't let me apologize for existing. The last time we spoke, she'd mentioned passing the bar and joining a small firm that handled family disputes and elder care. If you ever need anything, she'd said, but back then I believed needing things was my original sin. My thumb hovered. I could hear Dad's future in my head. Lawyers cost money, Claire. Moms, imagine the pastor hearing you dragged your family into court. But fear had already cost me more than any retainer. I hit call. The ring sounded absurdly loud in the quiet car. 1, 2, 3, then her voicemail. I hung up before the beep. My breath fogged the glass in small bursts. I called again. This time, on the second ring, her voice, Claire. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then everything came out in pieces, not the whole history, just the immediate facts. The papers, the threats, the way my parents used words like scalpels. Sarah didn't interrupt. When I ran out of breath, she said, calm and precise, you did the right thing calling. Take photos of everything they gave you. Do not sign. I'll meet you tomorrow. We'll talk options. We ended the call and I sat there listening to the car tick as the engine cooled. I tucked Dad's pen into the glove compartment as if sealing away a curse. In the faint reflection on the windshield, I almost didn't recognize my face, eyes red-rimmed, mouth a thin line, but underneath the exhaustion was a tiny, stubborn spark. I started the car. The porch light stayed steady behind me, an unblinking eye. I drove home with both windows cracked, letting the night air wash the dining room smell from my hair, and repeated Sarah's words until they stuck. A few days later, we met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with cement floors that make every footstep ring, and a barista who writes your name with a flourish like you're famous. It was late morning. The patio was full of people who looked like they had nowhere urgent to be. I did. My stomach hadn't settled since the night at my parents' table. Sarah was already there, posture straight, blazer crisp even in the Texas heat. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Anxiety sat there like a smudge of mascara she'd missed. On the table in front of her, a manila folder with a plastic tab and a clipped corner. Something official. Something heavy. I ordered you an iced latte, she said, businesslike, sliding a sweating plastic cup toward me. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, I admitted, pulling out the chair. You said you found something. She didn't waste time. Sarah placed her palm flat on the folder, as if bracing it against the wind, then nudged it across the table until it touched my arm. This is the police report on the accident, she said quietly. I think you should see it for yourself. My fingers didn't behave. They fumbled the metal clip, shook as I opened the cover. The paper inside smelled faintly of toner and dust, as if it had been asleep for years and we'd just flipped on the light. I read the heading, the ugly block letters that have ruined people's lives for as long as forms have existed. Location, Highway 287, 6 miles from the school. Time, 3:18 p.m. Driver, Kevin Price, 17. Vehicle, 1999 Honda motorcycle. Passenger, Liam Morgan, 14. The words didn't land where they were supposed to. They floated over my eyes, circled once, then dropped straight through me. Highway 287. 6 miles from the school. A motorcycle. Driver, Kevin Price. Passenger, Liam Morgan. It was like reading a story whose ending I already knew, but in a language I'd never seen before. Claire. Sarah's voice was careful. Do you want me to walk you through it? I shook my head even though my neck felt like glass. I ran my finger under the lines as if I were 6 and learning to read. 6 miles from the school. That was not the bus stop at the corner. That was not our quiet side street. That was not 2 minutes of cat food and a slammed screen door. Kevin Price, I said out loud, and the name tasted like something I'd once heard through a wall. I could see him now, the way teenagers blur in memory. Tall, shaggy dark hair, one of those boys who always had a cluster of kids around him after practice. Liam used to say Price, like it was a brand. Back then I thought Kevin was just another senior who high-fived freshmen to look benevolent. I was wrong. Or I hadn't known enough to be right. He had a motorcycle? I asked, even though the paper had already told me. Apparently, Sarah said. She had her lawyer face on, clean and neutral. It was registered to his father. Kevin was licensed, but still a minor at the time. I looked up, and for a moment the coffee shop doubled. It meant the story I'd lived under for 12 years had hinges. Liam wasn't walking to the bus, I said, hearing the disbelief in my own voice. He wasn't. Waiting for me. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. The paper sat between us like a small, tidy bomb. I flipped to the second page because I needed movement, any movement, even if it was only my hands. Boxes checked, lines filled, abbreviations that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been trained to decode them. The route number. Weather conditions, clear. Visibility, good. No mention of rain or fog or fate. The time again, 3:18 p.m. I looked at the corner where the date would have been and felt a hot flush rise up my neck. I remembered that day, the heat that stuck to the back of my knees, the smell of cut grass, the cat named Cheeto making a choked meow like a laugh. And I remembered the silence after the screen door, how I had told myself Liam was getting a head start, how I justified my slowness because the cats were hungry too. How many times had I replayed those minutes as the hinge on which everything turned? Too many. Enough that my brain had grooves in it, a record that skipped and skipped and skipped on the same scratched bar. But Highway 287 wasn't on that record. A motorcycle wasn't on that record. Kevin Price certainly wasn't. How did you get this? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Public records request, Sarah said. It took a few days longer than I liked because the case is old, but it's all there. The original filings, the ER notation of MVC, motor vehicle collision. The officers' names. The time stamp from the call. She hesitated. I wanted to be sure we weren't walking into something vague. I nodded. The words in the folder were not vague. They were hard-edged, rectangular. And they did not leave room for lore. My latte had turned watery. I took a sip anyway, grateful for the cold shock against my tongue. Outside, a bus sighed to a stop and exhaled a line of people. One boy moved separately, half a step ahead of his friends, a backpack slung too low. For a second I saw Liam in that boy's crooked dash across the crosswalk, all limbs and certainty. I closed my eyes. Claire, Sarah said, softer now, I need to ask, did your parents ever show you any documentation about the accident? No, I opened my eyes. Just stories. They're stories. Did they ever mention Kevin Price by name? I searched the chalkboard menu as if the answer might be written there in loopy handwriting between oat milk and seasonal syrup. No, I said finally. Never. It was always the bus stop. It was always me. The folder sat open, polite and devastating. I could feel the coffee shop moving around us, the low murmur of someone taking a conference call on AirPods, the hiss of milk steaming, the clatter of a tray. A woman laughed too loudly at something her friend said. I don't know what to do with this, I admitted. I mean, I know what it means. But I don't know what to do with the fact that I didn't cause. The word wouldn't come. I pushed the heel of my hand against my sternum where the old guilt sat like a stone and found, to my shock, that it shifted. Not gone. Not even lighter yet. Just moved. We're not deciding anything today, Sarah said. She reached over and, without touching me, set her hand close to mine, palm up, a small invitation I could take or leave. Today is for facts. You deserved the facts 12 years ago. 12 years ago. If this report had been handed to me then, if someone had sat me down and said, "Here, this is what happened," not the rumor, not the myth, would my life have been different? Would I have gone to UT on time, moved into a dorm, hung a whiteboard on my door that said Claire plus science equals BFFs? I closed the folder gently, like I was tucking a child into bed. My name, Morgan, Claire, appeared in the narrative only as next of kin, and even then it was a minor notation, a contact number. What else is in there? I asked carefully. More details, Sarah said, matching my caution. Diagrams, basic narratives. We can go through all of it together when you're ready. Her eyes flickered, and I could tell there were more pages she wanted to unfold, paths she could already see but knew better than to force me down. For now, the essential thing is this. The story you've carried is not the one the record tells. I nodded slowly. The room sharpened. The cement floor, the ring of a spoon on ceramic, the sun coming in at an angle that made dust visible in the air. It all felt like the world had been reissued in higher resolution. A car horn blared outside. I jumped, then laughed without humor. Sorry, I said, rubbing my temples. I keep bracing for someone to come in here and take the folder back. Like I wasn't supposed to see it. You were always supposed to see it, Sarah said. It was yours as much as anyone's. The report's last pages were photocopied witness statements, the ink a little smeared where some clerk's hand had dragged across it years ago. The passenger was laughing, hugging the driver around the waist. The motorcycle tried to run a red light. I stared at that one paragraph until my eyes blurred. The late-night phone calls when the house had already gone quiet, Liam whispering in the hallway, the blue glow of his screen painting stripes across his face as he said, yeah, I can make it," before he noticed me and shoved the phone into his pocket. The sudden insistence that he needed to go to basketball games after school even on days when I knew the team was away. The mysterious trips that never lined up with any official schedule, the way he'd return smelling like gasoline and wind, cheeks ruddy with a happiness that vanished the second he stepped inside our door. Back then, I had rolled my eyes and chalked it up to teen bravado. I was drowning in my own deadlines, trying to finish essays and scholarships while keeping peace at home. If he said basketball, fine. If he said a trip, fine. I didn't tug at loose threads because the house already felt like it would come apart with one wrong pull. I flipped to another statement. Light was yellow then red. Motorcycle accelerated. A different witness. Passenger leaned forward, arms tight. Both were laughing. I pressed my fingers into my temples where a headache pounded like a second heartbeat. It wasn't just that Liam hadn't been at the bus stop. It was that he had been somewhere else entirely, wrapped around a boy he admired, flying toward a risk he thought would only belong to that afternoon and not to the rest of our lives. Sarah watched me read without interrupting, the way a good nurse watches a patient breathe. When I finally looked up, she spoke gently, like she was taking a needle. "I talked to your aunt Anne," she said. "She confessed that on that day at the hospital, she heard your father say to your mother, 'Let's say that Claire didn't get him to the bus. She'll take the blame.'" The table might as well have tilted. I reached for the plastic cup of water like I was on a boat. She heard that? She did. She told me she stayed quiet because everyone was panicked and grieving, and then it got harder to speak the longer the story stood. By the time she realized the myth had calcified, contradicting it felt like betrayal. Sarah's mouth tightened. She said she's ashamed. I thought about Aunt Anne sitting small in a vinyl chair in that fluorescent hallway, hands shoved into her coat sleeves. I could almost hear my father's voice, steady, decisive, writing the script we would all be forced to perform. The memories kept coming, now wearing different labels. I flipped back through the report as if more proof might appear if I shuffled the pages. But the truth didn't need my permission to exist. It had been there in ink since the day of the crash. Why? I asked out loud, though I knew. Why would they choose that? Control, Sarah said carefully. Fear. Shame. Maybe they needed a clean narrative to present to the church, to friends, to themselves. A daughter is easier to manage than a teenage boy who broke rules. And once you accepted it, it solved a lot for them. Money, labor, obedience. I let my head fall into my hands. My palms were cold, my cheeks hot. Beyond the window, a city bus groaned away from a stop and took a pocket of shade with it. We didn't speak for a while. The barista called out names. Cups landed on the counter like small verdicts. Finally, Sarah said, the law is one thing. Family is another. We'll handle both. But I needed you to see this first. To know that the ground under your feet isn't what you were told it was. I nodded and tucked the statements back into the folder, smoothing the edges with the flat of my hand until they lined up again. The paper was warm from my fingers. It felt like new skin. And we'll talk, if you need her to, Sarah added. She's ready to tell the truth. That evening, when the apartment had slipped into that post-shift quiet where the refrigerator hum sounds like company, my phone rang. The screen lit a name I hadn't seen since high school, a name that had been ink on a police report just hours earlier. I stared for a heartbeat too long, then swiped. Hello. My voice came out thin. Claire. The male voice was careful, as if approaching a skittish animal. This is Kevin Price. I read your message. I've been waiting all these years for you to contact me. For a second, I didn't trust what I was hearing. The walls, the lamp, the half-unpacked tote with the manila folder in it, all of it seemed farther away, as if my living room had taken a step back to give this voice the floor. Kevin, I said, tasting the name. His breath fluttered against the receiver. I don't know where to start. Start anywhere, I said, sitting down because my knees had decided to argue with gravity. I'm listening. His voice trembled, the edges fraying like a paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. Your parents threatened to take me to court for corrupting a minor and for letting him ride without a helmet. I was scared. I was 17, and I kept quiet. He inhaled shakily. But I felt guilty all this time. I'm ready to sign an official statement. I pressed my free hand against my chest to check the speed of my heart, as if I could slow it with pressure. They threatened you? I repeated, to make sure my brain had something solid to hold. They cornered me at the hospital, he said. Not that first day later, after the surgeries. Your dad's jaw was set like a lock. Your mom did the talking. He exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She said words I didn't even know how to process then. Statutory consequences. Reckless endangerment. Public disgrace. She said if I told anyone Liam had been with me, if I said he'd wanted to ride, she'd make sure I got tried as an adult. She had lists. He went quiet for a second. I was a stupid kid on a bike who suddenly felt 80 years old. The lamp cast a circle of light on my coffee table. The folder's tab, police report, glowed like a sun. I didn't touch it. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could soften it. I was a coward, he said simply. And I was protecting myself. Anne. I thought maybe protecting Liam too. Your parents said he'd get in trouble at school, that colleges would hear, that he'd be blamed for everything. They said you were fragile. He paused. They said this would destroy your family. I closed my eyes. The kitchen clock clicked over to 8:31. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed and then another. I'm not proud of who I was, Kevin went on. I loved the way he looked at me. Like I was a doorway to something bigger than school and chores. He begged to ride that day. We'd ridden before. I told him to bring a helmet, and he said his parents would notice if it went missing. I should have said no. He swallowed. I didn't. The report says you tried to run a red, I said. My voice surprised me with its evenness. I saw it turn yellow, he admitted, voice low with shame. I thought we'd beat it. We didn't. He cleared his throat. I stayed away from the hospital after that first week, after your parents. Then my dad made me sell the bike. We moved 2 towns over the next summer. I kept thinking I'd write, that I'd find you on Facebook, he sighed. Every year it got heavier to carry and harder to lift. Did anyone ever ask you for a statement? Cops took something at the scene and later in ER. I wasn't thinking straight. After your parents, after they talked to me, I stopped answering unknown numbers. A beat. I was terrified of court, of being branded for the rest of my life. I've had the same nightmare for 12 years, standing up in front of a judge while your mom watches me like I'm a bug under glass. I realized my hand had gone numb around the phone. I switched ears, flexed my fingers. Kevin, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my tone, I have the report now. I've seen the names, the time, the road. Your name is on it. Liam's. Not mine. Silence, then a small, pained exhale. I know, he whispered. I know it wasn't you. I've known it wasn't you since the second your mom said it was. Heat pooled behind my eyes. I blinked hard at the ring of water on the table where my glass had been. What made you answer my message now? My wife, he said, and the words startled us both for a second. We had a baby in March. A son. When I hold him, I can't stand the thought of him ever being asked to carry someone else's lie. I've tried to be a decent man. But this, he let out a breath. This is a dead IO. The room tilted and then steadied. The refrigerator clicked off. The quiet deepened. You said you're ready to sign, I said, keeping my words small so they wouldn't break. I am, he replied. Whatever you need. All right, I'll swear, I'll show up. I'll say the part one should have said 12 years ago, that Liam climbed on the back of my bike because he wanted to, because I asked and he said yes, and because I was a reckless 17-year-old who thought yellow meant go faster. I could barely hold the phone. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might climb out of my throat and sit, panting, on the table next to the folder. Finally, I had not only the report, I had a living voice tethered to it, a confession that matched the ink. Thank you, I managed. The words were small compared to the size of the moment, but they were all I had. I'm sorry, he repeated. For all of it. For being quiet. For making you carry something that wasn't yours. We didn't talk about next steps. We didn't talk about strategy, or my parents, or what any of this would cost. We stayed on the line a little longer, breathing, two people connected by a decision made in sunlight at 3:18 p.m. on a strip of road 6 miles from a school, and by the long shadow it cast. A week later, my parents called it a family council, but it looked and felt like a public trial. Folding chairs had been dragged into the living room and arranged in stiff rows facing the fireplace, where Dad stood like a judge who had already chosen a sentence. The good china cabinet glared under the lamplight, and the same iron tablecloth from the signing was now draped over the coffee table, hiding a mound of envelopes and a box of tissues as if they were props in a familiar play. Elderly neighbors in Sunday cardigans found seats beside cousins I saw only on holidays. Our former piano teacher sat near Mrs. Donovan from 2 doors down, whispering behind her hand. A man in a navy suit, my parents' lawyer, balanced a leather folder on his knee like a gavel waiting to drop. Mom moved through the room handing out lemon bars on paper napkins, the peace offering that always preceded a reprimand. She didn't meet my eyes. Liam's wheelchair had been rolled to the side of the hearth, so he faced the crowd, not me. His hands were folded, knuckles white. From the hallway, I could smell roast chicken and furniture polish, the scent of an ordinary Sunday pressed into service for something crueler. Dad raised a hand for quiet. He wore the dark tie he reserves for funerals and church fundraisers. Thank you all for coming, he began, voice steady, performative. We're here because our family needs support. Our daughter Claire refuses to pay for her brother. She wants to abandon him without care. A murmur moved through the chairs. The sound felt rehearsed. I felt my fingers go cold, then hot. Sarah stood beside me, posture straight, a portfolio tucked under her arm. Kevin hovered near the doorway, pale but resolute, his hair shorter than in my memory of high school hallways. Aunt Anne sat on the edge of a chair, hands clenched in her lap. We had agreed on the sequence. No surprises, only documents. I cleared my throat, not to interrupt but to prove I had a voice. Dad continued, louder. We have asked only for fairness, he said. Claire makes a decent living and has refused her responsibility. We cannot do this alone. He gestured to the lawyer, who nodded gravely, a man playing his assigned role. A few neighbors dipped their chins in sympathy. It stung, how easily strangers could be made to pity the version of my parents they presented when there were eyes to notice. Sarah stepped forward, her heels making 2 clean clicks on the hardwood. Before we go further, she said evenly, Everyone should have the same information. Facts matter. She opened her portfolio and began handing out slim black folders we had assembled the night before at my kitchen table. Each folder held 3 things: the police report, photocopied witness statements, photocopies of bank statements showing withdrawals from the so-called Liam donation fund that matched credit card payments, and a Vegas hotel bill with my parents' names. We had highlighted with yellow and care the lines no one should miss. I moved through the room beside her, passing folders into familiar hands. Mrs. Donovan took hers with a wounded expression, as if paper itself could be an accusation. The piano teacher peered over her glasses. Cousin Mark flipped straight to the bank statements and went still. Dad bristled. "This is unnecessary," he stated. "We're not here to drudge up." "We are," Sarah replied, not unkindly. "We are exactly here to look at what happened and what has been said about it." Kevin shifted his weight, and then, before anyone could decide to stop him, he stood. The room tightened, the way an auditorium does seconds before the curtain lifts. He looked at Liam, then at my parents, then at me. When he spoke, his voice was steady in a way that sounded hard-won. "Liam was with me on the motorcycle," he said. He agreed to it himself. "Everything they said about Claire is a lie." The words cracked the air. Someone sucked their teeth. A chair leg scraped. The lawyer's pen stopped moving. "I was 17, he continued. "I made a reckless choice. I saw the light turn yellow and I went faster." Liam held on and laughed, and then everything broke. "After the crash, your parents threatened me with charges. I kept quiet because I was scared. That was wrong. I'm here to say it now, and I've signed a formal statement." He held up a page. Sarah had already included the notarized copy in every folder. Even from across the room, I could see my name absent from the narrative of that day, replaced by coordinates, times, and the truth I'd been denied. Dad's mouth tightened. Mom's hand shot to her throat, then dropped like she'd remembered an audience was watching. The lawyer cleared his throat, finding his footing. "Mr. Price," he began, with respect, revisiting trauma. Aunt and stood, interrupting with a tremor that made her taller. "I heard it," she said, louder than I'd ever heard her speak. "On the day of the accident, in the hospital hallway." She pointed at Dad, hand shaking, told her. She pointed at Mom. "Let's say that Claire didn't get him to the bus. She'll take the blame." I said nothing then, and I've regretted it every day since. I am saying it now. Eyes pivoted to my parents. Mom blinked fast. Dad's jaw worked as if chewing through a rope. A neighbor whispered my name, and then looked down at the folder in her lap, cheeks coloring. And then Liam spoke for the first time. "It's really true," he said, and the room's noise thinned to a ring. His voice was softer than I expected and older than 26. "I knew it. But I let them blame Claire all these years, under threat from my parents that I would be left on the street with nothing but a wheelchair." He swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. "I should have told the truth. I didn't. I was a kid, and then I was scared, and then it was easier, I guess, to let it be what they said it was." "I'm so sorry." Silence fell, not performative but total, a blanket thrown over the room. The lawyer shifted first. "This is highly irregular," he murmured, but it sounded like the line belonged to a different script. Mrs. Donovan closed her eyes and ran a thumb along the folder's edge like a rosary. Cousin Mark leaned back, lips pressed thin, his face the contorted shape of someone rearranging loyalties in real time. Dad looked to Mom for footing and found none. His confidence, so polished moments ago, collapsed inward, like a tent with the center pole kicked out. He tried to stand taller. "This doesn't change the practicalities," he said, but the sentence came out thinner than it had arrived in his head. "Liam still needs care." "No one said he doesn't," I answered, and even I heard how calm I sounded with facts in my pocket. "But I will not be coerced by lies. Not anymore." Mom looked around the room in quick, desperate sweeps, searching for faces that had always nodded when she needed them to. Those faces were bent over black folders. Kevin exhaled, shoulders dropping in a way that told me he had been carrying the same stone I had, though differently shaped. After the council, everything shifted like furniture dragged across a floor. The calls that used to arrive in waves from cousins and church friends now came to me in whispers. "I had no idea, Claire." I'm so sorry. Aunt and stopped whispering and started bringing evidence. Emails, texts, dates, anything that might matter if the story turned legal. It did. Within a week, a detective from Financial Crimes left a card on my door and another with Sarah. The Liam Donation Fund, proudly advertised for years at church potlucks and Christmas mailers, was now an open file. The ledger told its own stubborn truth: deposits from kind people who believed they were paying for ramps and therapy, withdrawals that landed squarely on a bank loan and an expensive hotel in Las Vegas, complete with a room upgrade and spa charges. Relatives who once praised my parents' sacrifice stopped taking their calls. Mrs. Donovan crossed the street to avoid Mom's car. The piano teacher returned a casserole dish with a note that said only, "I hope the truth sets you free." At church, Pastor Allen announced a pause on any further collections until clarity and accountability were established. My parents stopped showing up. The foyer that had been their stage was suddenly a hard place to stand. Sarah moved quickly in the quieter spaces where protection is built. She filed for a restraining order that barred my parents from contacting me at home or at the hospital and prohibited third-party harassment. The judge read the affidavits, my notes, Kevin's statement, Anne's account, and signed. I walked out holding a sheet of paper that felt heavier than its weight. It didn't fix the past, but it put up a fence around my present. Liam surprised me most. He asked Sarah to help him apply for housing, and within a month he moved into a ground-floor unit in a small complex on South Lamar. The doorways were widened, the bathroom retrofitted with grab bars, the counters lowered so he could cook without burning his forearms on the edge of the stove. On move-in day, he wheeled through the living room and touched the wall with his palm like he was checking whether it was real. We labeled drawers. We tested the ramp twice, then a third time just because we could. He laughed, an unguarded, boyish sound I hadn't heard since before the accident, and it startled me so much I had to sit down. He qualified for benefits we were told he didn't qualify for. Sarah's paralegal sat with him and filled out forms our parents had hidden or lost. A caseworker explained options: in-home attendant hours, transportation vouchers, adaptive tech. Liam listened with a kind of hungry focus and said yes whenever yes was honest. Later, he sent me a photo of his new mail with his name printed above the words benefits approval, and I cried into a dish towel for 5 full minutes, relieved and furious and proud all at once. With the monthly payments to my parents gone, my bank account looked like a room with the windows finally open. I enrolled in a master's program in nursing, education track, night classes 2 evenings a week at UT. Filling out the application felt like rewiring a house that had always flickered. When the acceptance email arrived, I read it in the hospital break room between a trauma page and a coffee refill. At work, word spread the way good gossip sometimes does, quietly, choosing careful mouths. I didn't explain much. I didn't have to. Nurses know about the things families do to one another when grief goes sour and money grows teeth. One colleague left a foil pan of baked ziti on my front step with a note that said, "Eat, sleep, repeat." Another texted, "Headed near South Lamar, need anything for Liam?" A resident who never remembered anyone's name remembered to ask how the ramp installation went. Our charge nurse, who always calls me Morgan like we're in the military, tapped the class schedule on my locker and said, "Proud of you, Morgan. Put your brilliance on paper." The investigation was slow because investigations are slow, but it was relentless. Detectives interviewed donors who had received glossy thank you cards with stock photos of wheelchairs we didn't own. They traced the fundraiser checks into my parents' joint account, then out again to payments labeled home improvement that matched contractor invoices for their kitchen, not Liam's accessibility needs. Sarah kept me updated in plain language. This part looks solid. This part is pending. Don't speak to them. Keep your receipts. I slept better with the restraining order in place, though some nights the old sentences still knocked against the inside of my skull like a branch against glass. On those nights, I would make tea, sit at the small table by my window, and write out what was true now: Liam has a lease. I am in grad school. The fund is under investigation. I am not paying my parents. Truth needs practice. Putting it in ink helped it stay. A year later, the air in my life felt bright and breathable in a way I once thought was for other people. Between night classes and shifts, Liam and I kept sketching ideas on napkins and legal pads until the sketches became forms, and the forms became a mission with a name: the Morgan Care Foundation. We rented a narrow office in a brick building off South Lamar, one room for intakes, one room for workshops, and a closet that we ambitiously labeled Legal Resources. Sarah joined our board pro bono, then bullied 3 brilliant social workers into volunteering Saturday hours. A graphic designer from my hospital made us a logo, a simple outline of a ramp turning into a road, and refused payment beyond a box of collages. Our first program was basic and radical at the same time: guided benefits navigation with someone sitting beside you the whole way. We hosted paperwork clinics where coffee was strong and pens didn't wander off, where people could breathe while a volunteer translated acronyms that once felt like locked doors. We compiled a list of adaptive housing landlords who actually returned calls. We built a tiny lending library, shower chairs, transfer boards, a travel ramp that folded like a suitcase. On Tuesday nights, we ran a class called Setting Boundaries Without Apology, taught by a soft-spoken therapist who understood that care isn't a synonym for compliance. Word spread through church bulletins, Facebook groups, and the grapevine nurses trust more than any memo. A mom arrived with her teenage daughter and left with a benefits approval they'd been told was impossible. An older man wheeled in alone and left with a volunteer roster full of neighbors willing to visit after his surgery. When the opening day finally came, the day we stopped being an idea and became an address, Austin gave us one of those above-weather afternoons: clear, dry, light slanting gold across the parking lot. We taped a ribbon across the door we'd painted the exact shade of hopeful blue Liam insisted on. Coffee percolated inside. Someone donated a balloon arch that made the doorway look like a party even before anyone spoke. Friends from the hospital came in scrubs, name badges clipped to their pockets. Our caseworker from the early days hugged Liam so hard his glasses went crooked. And brought deviled eggs because ribbon cuttings still need protein. A few of the neighbors who once sat through my parents' performances now stood quietly in the back, holding plates, watching with eyes that looked more open than before. We started with thank yous. I read a list that was half donors and half people who had lent us folding chairs. Then I turned the mic to Liam. He sat facing the crowd, hands folded carefully on his lap, the blue door a bright frame behind him. When he began, his voice wobbled, then found itself. My real paralysis was not my disability, he said, eyes shining, but the lies I lived with. For years, I thought if I told the truth, I'd be left out in the cold. That fear was its own kind of prison. What Claire and Sarah did, what we are trying to do here, is make sure no one is trapped by someone else's story of them. If you need help, you deserve it. No one should have to pay for it with their dignity. He had to stop then because everyone started clapping too soon. He laughed and wiped his cheeks with his sleeve and passed me the mic like it weighed less now. I took a breath and felt the old pain, the 12-year ache, settle into something that didn't tie my lungs. My parents blamed me for my brother's accident for 12 years until I found the real police report, I said. The truth freed us both. I told them about the folder on the coffee shop table, the dates, the diagrams, the way a road I'd never driven became the map for our freedom. I kept it simple. We built this place so that families wouldn't have to fight for facts alone. We built it so that disabled people could get what they are entitled to without being made to kneel for it. We built it because the right story can save a life, including yours. The ribbon looked almost silly by then, like a prop in a play that had already made its point. We cut it anyway with a pair of big ceremonial scissors the city loaned us, and the room burst into that messy, gorgeous sound of people believing at the same time. A toddler clapped like he'd invented applause. The coffee tasted better than the budget allowed. In the months that followed, our calendar filled faster than our filing cabinet. We piloted a microgrant program for temporary ramps while people waited on back-ordered equipment. We paired new chair users with mentors who would tell them which gloves won't shred in August and which curb cuts in South Austin are a lie. We hosted a clinic on spotting financial manipulation, complete with a handout Sarah wrote titled, Help versus Control, Know the Difference. The sign-in sheets turned into holiday card lists. Tuesdays remained our boundary nights. Sometimes I sat in the back after a shift, soaking up words I needed as much as anyone. I still worked at the hospital and chipped away at my master's, writing papers about patient advocacy that didn't feel abstract anymore. Liam sent me photos of his chalkboard when I was too tired to drop by. We celebrated grants with tacos, approvals with cheap champagne, and no, with a bell by the door that anyone could ring. Little by little, we felt the thing we promised in our brochure become true. People walked in burdened and left a little taller. Every so often, I would find myself alone in the office after locking up, standing in the doorway we painted hopeful blue. The ramp caught the last light. The sign with our name creaked softly in the breeze, metal on metal, reassuring as a familiar voice saying, "Keep going." For the first time, I felt that Liam and I were not living under the weight of someone else's guilt, but with the right to our own normal life. We had work to do. We had a way to do it. And when I turned off the lights, the room didn't go dark. It rested, ready for morning. Liam lives separately now, in an apartment equipped with ramps, wide doors, and dignity. He receives the benefits he was always entitled to, benefits my parents cruelly hid from us, pretending they did not exist. For the first time in over a decade, my brother and I talk like siblings again, without the shadow of lies between us. He is learning what freedom feels like, and so am I. And our parents? They are left alone, surrounded not by love or loyalty, but by the ruins of their own lies. No relatives defend them anymore. No neighbors believe their stories. The truth has a way of stripping away masks, and theirs are gone forever. I used to believe family was everything. But I learned something more important. Boundaries matter more than blood. Family without respect and honesty is not family at all. It's a cage. Never let even your closest relatives dictate your life if they do so through deception and manipulation. Love should not come with conditions, contracts, or threats. My brother once said that his real paralysis wasn't physical, but the weight of lies he carried. For me, my real healing wasn't professional therapy or achievements. It was daring to uncover the truth and set myself free. So now, I want to ask you, have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Have you ever lived under someone else's version of the story until you almost believed it yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your own stories. And if you believe truth and boundaries matter, hit that like and subscribe buttons. This channel is a safe place for people who've had to stand up to family lies and reclaim their own lives.